Night, my sister-in-law emptied our joint savings account. I was standing in the hospital admissions office, 31 weeks pregnant, holding a form that asked for a $4,200 deposit. The woman behind the desk had kind eyes. She asked me if I needed a moment. I told her I needed a minute to call my husband. What I didn't tell her was that my hands had gone completely numb, that the room felt like it was tilting sideways, and that somewhere in the back of my mind, a version of me that had seen this coming was screaming. My name is irrelevant. What matters is that I was 29 years old, 7 months pregnant with my first child, working part-time as a dental hygienist, because my husband and I had agreed I would cut back hours during the 3rd trimester. We had a plan. We had savings. We had a joint account that my husband's sister had access to. And that last part is where everything begins to fall apart. Let me back up. My husband and I had been together for 4 years before we got married. His family is close-knit in the way that sounds warm until you're inside it, and then it feels less like warmth and more like walls. His mother is the center of everything. His sister, 2 years older than him, unmarried, currently between jobs, currently living in the in-law suite attached to our house, orbits her like a second moon. Whatever his mother decided was right, his sister enforced. Whatever his sister wanted, his mother justified. And my husband, the man I loved, the man I had chosen, stood somewhere in the middle of all of it and called it family loyalty. I called it something else, but I kept that to myself for a long time. When we found out I was pregnant, I was genuinely happy. We both were. My husband cried in the car on the way home from the doctor's office. The good kind of crying, the kind where he had to pull over because he couldn't see the road. I held his hand and thought, okay, this is real. This is us. This is going to be good. His mother's reaction was more complicated. She was happy, she said. She hugged me. She said all the right things. But within 2 weeks, she had started making comments about how the nursery should be set up, which pediatrician we should use, whether I would breastfeed, and whether, given that I was only working part-time now, it made sense for her and my sister-in-law to have a key to our house so they could help out more easily. I said we'd think about it. My husband gave them a key the following weekend while I was at my prenatal yoga class. I found out when I came home and my sister-in-law was reorganizing my kitchen cabinets. She smiled at me when I walked in, this big open smile, like she was doing me the most generous favor in the world, and she said, "Don't worry. I'm putting everything somewhere more logical." I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen in my own house with my yoga mat under my arm, and I thought about saying something. I thought about a lot of things in that moment. Instead, I put my mat down, poured myself a glass of water, and asked where she'd move the glasses. That was October. By December, she had an opinion about every piece of furniture we'd ordered for the nursery. A standing habit of arriving on Tuesday and Thursday mornings without texting first, and a running commentary on everything from my prenatal vitamins to the fact that I was still eating deli meat sometimes. My husband thought I was being sensitive when I brought it up. His exact words were, "She's just excited about the baby. It's coming from a good place." I started keeping notes on my phone, not because I knew I'd need them, more because writing things down was the only way I could make myself feel like I wasn't losing my mind. In January, my husband's company went through a round of layoffs and he survived, but his hours got cut significantly. We sat down and looked at our finances together. We had about $14,000 in our joint savings, money we'd been putting aside specifically for the baby. Hospital deposit, first few months of reduced income, a buffer in case anything went wrong. It felt like enough. It felt like we were prepared. His sister was in the living room during that conversation. I remember noticing that she could hear us. I remember thinking it didn't matter. That was my mistake. February 3rd, I had a routine prenatal appointment in the morning, and afterward, I went straight to the hospital to pre-register, which my OB had been reminding me to do for weeks. Pre-registration means filling out your paperwork early, providing insurance information, and, at this particular hospital, putting down an initial deposit that would be applied to whatever balance remained after insurance processed the delivery. I handed the woman my debit card, the joint account card, and watched her run it. She looked at her screen. She looked at me. She said, "I'm sorry, this is coming back as insufficient funds." I thought it was a mistake, a banking error. I asked her to try again. She did. Same result. She turned the screen toward me so I could see the balance that had come back, and I looked at the number, and the number was $47. $47. In an account that had contained over $14,000 11 days ago. I know it was 11 days because I had checked the balance when we got our water bill. I remembered thinking, good, we're in good shape, and then I'd closed the app and made dinner. I excused myself from the desk. I went to the hallway. I sat down in one of those waiting room chairs that are bolted to the floor, and I opened my banking app and I looked at the transaction history. 14 transfers, over 11 days, ranging from $400 to $2,300, all initiated from the same authorized user on the account. My sister-in-law's name. I want to tell you that I immediately called the police, or immediately confronted her, or immediately did something decisive and strong. I want to tell you that. But the truth is, I sat in that hallway for about 6 minutes doing nothing except breathing, because my body had gone into a kind of shock where my brain understood what it was seeing, but refused to fully process it. And underneath everything, I was 31 weeks pregnant and the baby was moving and I could feel it. And I just kept thinking, not yet, not here. Stay calm, stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. I called my husband first. He didn't answer. I called him 3 more times. Nothing. Then I called my mother. My mother picked up on the second ring and I said, Mom, I need you to come to Mercy General right now. And she heard something in my voice that made her not ask any questions. She just said, I'm getting my keys. While I waited, I went back to the desk and I explained, quietly and as steadily as I could, that there had been a fraudulent transfer from my account and I would be resolving it and returning to complete my pre-registration. The woman was kind. She gave me a direct number to call when I was ready. My mother arrived in 19 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire time. She sat down next to me and I showed her my phone. I showed her the transfers. I showed her my sister-in-law's name attached to every single one. My mother is not a dramatic woman. She looked at the screen for a long time, and then she looked at me, and she said, Where is she right now? I said, Probably at my house. My mother said, Okay, we're going to the bank first. We went to the bank. I explained the situation to a branch manager named David, who was thorough and patient and clearly uncomfortable. He confirmed that my sister-in-law had been added as an authorized user on the account, which meant the transfers technically were not fraudulent in the traditional sense. She had account access. She had used it. The legal designation of what she'd done was something the bank's fraud department would need to evaluate, and he strongly recommended I contact law enforcement regardless. I asked him to remove her from the account immediately. He did. I asked him to freeze any outgoing transfers pending review. He did that too. And then my mother drove me home. My husband's car was in the driveway, so was his sister's. When I walked in, they were both in the kitchen. My sister-in-law was cooking something, moving around my kitchen like she lived there, which at that point I suppose she more or less felt like she did. My husband was on his phone. He looked up when I came in and started to say something about how he'd missed my calls. He'd been in a meeting. What was going on? I put my phone on the kitchen counter with the transaction history pulled up. I said, Would you like to explain this to me? My sister-in-law turned around from the stove. She looked at the phone. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly, more like recalculation. She said, I was holding it for you. I said, Holding what? She said, The money. Mom and I talked about it, and we thought it made more sense for me to keep it somewhere safe, since you're not working full hours and we didn't want you to spend it on something you didn't need. The room was very quiet. I said, You took $14,000 from my account because you decided it wasn't safe with me. She said, Our account. Marcus is on that account too. My husband said my name, just my name, like a warning or a plea. I still don't know which. I said, Marcus. Did you know about this? He didn't answer fast enough. And that non-answer told me everything. My mother, who had been standing in the doorway behind me, stepped into the kitchen. She looked at my husband and then at his sister, and she said very calmly, You have until tomorrow morning to return every dollar to that account. After that, we're filing a report. My sister-in-law looked at her like she was performing a scene in a play she hadn't been given the script for. She said, This is a family matter. My mother said, Yes, and my daughter is my family. Then she looked at my husband and said, I hope you understand what's happening here. I really do. We left. My mother took me to her house, and I slept in my old bedroom with the yellow curtains and the quilt my grandmother made, and I lay there in the dark with one hand on my stomach, and I thought about every moment over the past several months where I dismissed my own instincts. Every Tuesday morning, I'd said nothing. Every reorganized cabinet. Every unsolicited opinion about my body and my choices. Every time I'd looked at my husband and waited for him to say something and watched him choose silence instead, I thought about the version of me that had kept notes on her phone. I pulled up those notes. There were 43 of them. The next morning, I called the family lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she had the specific energy of someone who had heard every version of this story and was still, somehow, both unsurprised and completely on your side. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. At the end, she said, You know that authorized user distinction is going to matter. Do you have any written communication from your sister-in-law about her intentions with the money? I said I didn't know. I told her about the notes on my phone. She said, Forward me everything. While I was on the phone with Patricia, my husband texted me 11 times. I read them in order. The first 3 were apologetic in tone. He hadn't known the full extent. He'd thought it was a short-term thing. He was sorry. The next 4 shifted into explanation. His sister had been struggling financially. His mother had asked him to make sure the money was protected. He hadn't realized I'd be upset. The last 4 were something else entirely. Asking where I was. Saying I was being dramatic. Saying I needed to come home and talk about this, like an adult. I forwarded all 11 to Patricia. She texted back, "Perfect. Thank you." What I did not know at that point, what I found out 2 days later, was that my sister-in-law had not simply been holding the money. Patricia's preliminary review of the bank records showed that $6,400 of the $14,000 had already been moved to a secondary account in my sister-in-law's name, and from there, several transactions had gone out to what appeared to be a personal loan repayment and 2 credit card accounts. She hadn't been protecting our money. She'd been using it. When Patricia shared this with me, I was sitting in my mother's living room with a cup of tea I hadn't touched. My mother was on the couch across from me. I read the email, and then I read it again, and I put my phone face down on the cushion next to me, and I said, "She spent it." My mother said, "How much?" I said, "More than half." My mother closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and said, "Okay, what does Patricia say to do next?" Patricia said to file a police report, which we did that afternoon. The officer we spoke to was straightforward about the complexity. Authorized user status created a gray area. But the documented intention, my sister-in-law's own text to my husband, which he had forwarded to me in one of his apologetic early messages, and which he apparently forgot contained her exact words, "I'm going to pull the baby money so she can't waste it." That documented intention shifted the picture considerably. Patricia called it misappropriation of funds obtained under deceptive pretense. She said it with the same tone someone might use to describe the weather. The police report was filed on a Thursday. By Friday morning, my mother-in-law had called me 4 times. I let them all go to voicemail. In the messages, she cycled through confusion, then hurt, then anger, and finally landed on a version of events in which I had been planning to destroy her family all along, and this was simply the moment I had chosen to execute that plan. In her last message, she said, "You are using that baby as a weapon, and Marcus knows it." I saved all 4 voicemails. My husband came to my mother's house on Saturday. He stood on the front porch, and he looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not just physically tired, but tired somewhere deeper. The kind of tired that comes from finally seeing something clearly that you spent a long time working very hard not to see. I stood in the doorway. I did not invite him in. He said he had talked to a lawyer of his own. I said okay. He said his sister had agreed to return the full amount to avoid criminal proceedings. He said it like he was delivering good news. I said, "She spent $6,400 of it. Where is that money coming from?" He said his mother was covering the difference. I said, "Your mother, who approved this plan, is now paying to clean it up." He said, "I know how it sounds." I said, "Marcus, I was standing in the hospital admissions office at 31 weeks pregnant, and my debit card came back with $47 on it. I had to call my mother because you didn't pick up. I sat in the hallway for 6 minutes, trying not to have a panic attack while the baby was moving, because I didn't want to stress her." I stopped. I looked at him. "I need you to understand that this was not just a financial thing." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that a car passed on the street behind him and a dog barked somewhere down the block. Then he said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." I said, "I know you to decide something. Not for me. For you. I need you to decide who you are in this marriage, whether you are my partner or whether you are your mother's son first and my husband second. Because I cannot do both. I cannot raise a child in a house where the answer to that question keeps changing depending on who's in the room." He didn't answer me that day. He nodded and he left, and I went back inside and sat with my mother, and we watched a home renovation show and didn't talk about any of it, because sometimes you just need to sit with someone who is entirely on your side and watch strangers argue about kitchen tile. The money was returned in full the following Tuesday, all $14,200, the remainder from the account, plus the $6,400 his mother covered. Patricia confirmed receipt and marked the restitution in the file. The police report remained open, but the detective indicated that with full restitution and no prior record, prosecution was unlikely unless I chose to push forward. I kept the report open, not because I planned to pursue it, but because I wanted my sister-in-law to have to think about whether I might. She moved out of our in-law suite 2 weeks later. I don't know exactly what was said between her and my husband, because I wasn't there and he gave me only a partial account. What I know is that when the last of her boxes were gone and my husband locked the suite's interior door and brought me the key, he stood in the kitchen and said, "It should have been like this from the beginning. I'm sorry it took me this long to make it right. I took the key. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't okay. But I said, thank you. We're still together. That is not a fairy tale ending, and I want to be honest about that. We are together, and we are in counseling, both individually and as a couple. And some weeks it feels like we are genuinely building something stronger. And some weeks it feels like we are two people carefully navigating a space where the floor used to be. We have a daughter now. She's 8 weeks old, and she is the most astonishing thing I have ever seen. She has her father's ears and my mother's stubbornness, and absolutely no awareness of any of the chaos that preceded her arrival. She doesn't need to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever, in full detail. What I know is this. The morning I sat in that hospital hallway and looked at $47 in an account that should have held our security, that was the moment something shifted permanently in me. Not broke. Shifted. The version of me who kept her voice down to keep the peace, who moved her yoga mat out of the doorway without a word, who watched her kitchen get reorganized and poured herself a glass of water and asked where the glasses had gone. That version of me closed a door. I think about those 43 notes on my phone sometimes. I think about the fact that I had been documenting things for months without fully admitting to myself what I was documenting or why. I think I knew, somewhere underneath the hoping it would get better, and the giving the benefit of the doubt and the he says she means well. I knew. If you are in a house where you feel like a guest in your own life, where your instincts are being constantly reframed as sensitivity or overreaction, where the person who is supposed to choose you keeps finding reasons not to, I want you to hear something. Your 43 notes are data. Pay attention to them.